Have you ever heard of a place called the Hill of Evil Counsel in Jerusalem? No? Well, it's a very interesting place and has a dark history connected to the nation of Israel. First, the Jewish tradition says that it is on this hill that Absalom, David's son, received an advice to overthrow his father. Of course, this was a very evil advice, not only to overthrow his father, but also to sleep with all of David's concubines. But that's not all. The things got even worse in the time of Solomon, because during his reign, he allowed for the creation of shrines to the foreign gods of Chemosh and Molech. Molech was a god where children were sacrificed. So on this mountain, there were some really evil things going on. Now, the sacrifice of children is the greatest abomination you can do, and Israel was severely punished by the God of Israel for it. Another tradition, possibly from the Byzantine period, says that on the Hill of Evil Counsel, the house of the high priest was located, where the priests and elders of Israel plotted against Jesus. But the location of the Hill of Evil Counsel is actually debatable. So let's talk about it. So here you can see my 3D model of the topography of Jerusalem with the model of the city of David. So we are looking right now from south to north, and we're looking at the city of David. We have the place where the temple will stand. This model is not ready yet, but I just put it a simple model so that you can orientate where the temple was located on Mount Moriah. And then we have the Mount of Olives and the Western Hill, which is sometimes called the Hill of Zion, the Zion Mountain. So where's the Hill of Evil Counsel on this model? Well, the proposed location, one of the proposed location, is this hill over here. And today this hill is better known as Abu Tor. But to present to you the second option, I will have to pull up the modern model of Jerusalem. So let's do that. So once again, you can see the city of David, but now you can see the modern Jerusalem and its topography. So once again, for the sake of orientation, you can see the Temple Mount, the city of David, Mount of Olives, and the Western Hill. And of course, we can see the neighborhood of Abu Tor, which is the first proposed location for the Hill of Evil Counsel. But to see the second candidate for the Hill of Evil Counsel, we have to zoom out even further, and then we can see the significance of this hill. And the significance is really the geography. From that point, we have an excellent view on everything important in Jerusalem. So if we draw a straight line from that point, we are even higher than the Temple Mount. That's why strategically, this seems to be a very important spot for observation. And in ancient times, you can imagine it would be valued to be here because you can observe the city of David, the Temple Mount, and all of important places in Jerusalem. Anyway, I have a short video from this hilltop that I will share with you right now. It is just an introduction to a longer video, which you will be able to see at the end of this episode. So enjoy the view.
Shalom friends, today I have another wonderful view for you. We are in Jerusalem, on the south side of Jerusalem, in the direction of Hebron, and as you see in front of us we have a beautiful panorama of Jerusalem.
So again, for orientation, I will show you where exactly I was standing in this video you just saw. So this is the spot, and it's part of the Tayelet promenade, which is a nice spot to walk around in Jerusalem today. So let's look what we have in this neighborhood. So I'm zooming right now, and here you can see the square. This is where I was recording the video. But the place that really interests us is just a couple dozen meters away from this viewpoint, and it's this territory over here. You can see like half a Star of a David here, and I'll get back why this place is very important. So I'll just zoom out a little bit, and I want to show you something interesting here. So, you know, in Google, you can turn on the street view, so you can see like the blue lines, and it shows you where you can zoom in to see the streets, like in photo mode. So you can see all those blue lines, but in this area, which interests us, there's hardly any places we can zoom in. There are just some spots we can zoom in, and that's basically it. So we can look around, but we can't really walk here. It's very limited. And it's all around this place that interests us here. So why is that? Well, we're going to talk about it, but it's very intriguing, right? So, first of all, before we move on, I want to mention a few things. So, what interesting is here is this neighborhood Talpiot Mizrach, so the east of Talpiot. And it refers to this neighborhood here, which is Talpiot proper. And the word Talpiot means the mountain of fortress. And I'll talk why this is important in a moment. But first, one more thing I want to say. So if we zoom in a little bit more over here, you will see that the US Embassy in Israel is located now also in this location. So an interesting spot, right, on this mountain that we have the Embassy of the United States. And now, guys, a very important thing here. If we look here, you will see like a white line over here. It's dashed line. And if we zoom in, you will see the name Armistice Line of 1949. Okay, so you see this line, and you'll see that this line goes through this neighborhood of East Talpiot. So this is East Talpiot, and right next to it is an Arab neighborhood over here. So you have an Arab neighborhood right next to this Jewish neighborhood of East Talpiot. So what is this line all about? Well, let's talk about it. So before we get into details, I have to talk a little bit about the context. So this is the map in 1948 of Israel and its neighbors. So if you remember, right after Ben-Gurion announced the Declaration of Independence, this tiny infant nation of Israel was attacked by all of its neighbors. And the idea basically was to push all the Jewish people into the Mediterranean Sea. But this war that was started by the Arab nations, that also just came into existence, didn't produce results that the Arab nations hoped for. Israel was able to defend itself, and the map you see now are the territories controlled by each country. Now, for this episode, we are most interested in this territory over here. This territory is called Judea and Samaria. Now, sometimes people, by mistake, call it the West Bank. Why? Because it's west of Jordan, and Jordan started controlling this territory after the War of Independence. But it's a very artificial name because Judea and Samaria functioned this name for thousands of years, while the people of Jordan never had a historical heritage to those territories. So here you can see the territories that the Kingdom of Israel controlled around 1000 BC. And of course, this information we can find in the Bible, but there are plenty of archaeological findings that point to this reality. And what is interesting about this map, if you compare it to today's reality, we see that not only Israel at that time controlled the territories of Judea and Samaria, but also they controlled the territories east of Judea and Samaria, which today is parts of today's Jordan and Syria. And that's because if you read the Bible, you know that those territories were given to the tribe of Reuben, Gad, and East Manasseh. And if we go back to our map from 1948, do you know when Jordan received its independence and became a country? Well, it happened in 1946, so 2 years before Israel announced its independence. So here you have a map of the world in 1914, so just before World War I. So I'm showing this map to point out how many border changes we had in the 20th century. Before World War I, the most influential powers were the British Empire, France, the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the Ottoman Empire, and of course the United States, although the involvement of the United States in World War I was minimal compared to other countries. And of course we could talk a lot about World War I and its significance, but for now I would like us to focus on the territories that are circled in red right now. So the territories we know today as the Near East. But before we will move on, I just want to point out one more thing. So you have Egypt marked here on this map, and that's because Egypt at that time in 1914 was still under the British protectorate. And the British really didn't move out of Egypt for a really long time. Although Egypt got its independence in 1922, the British left only in the 50s. And that's because the British were shareholders of the Suez Canal built by the French in Egypt. Needless to say, the Brits were very interested in controlling this trade route for economic reasons. Okay, but let's zoom in now to the territories that actually interest us. So the key player in this region before World War I was, of course, the Ottoman Empire. So this is 1914, okay? And now look at this territory already in 1920. So what we have here is basically the Ottoman Empire chopped into pieces. Ottoman Empire was the losing side of World War I, and it had to face consequences. What we have of this vast empire that ruled the Near East and Africa for several centuries is this small territory of the Republic of Turkey now. And the rest is given to the winners. But what I would like you to see on this map is that the only country we have in the Near East today is Egypt. The rest are countries that don't exist today or countries that were controlled by other powers. And even Egypt, if you remember, was under a heavy influence of the British until 1956. 1956 is the date that the British troops finally left the Suez Canal area. So now back to our main map, and after this, I promise we'll go back to the Hill of Evil Council. But I think you need to know the background before we talk about it. So in 1949, a deal was reached, negotiated by the United Nations for a ceasefire between Israel and the Arab nations. What happened is that a green line, and I really mean green because a green marker was used to draw up the borders between Israel and the Arab nations, the territories that were controlled by Israel and the territories that the Arab nations were supposed to control. And as you can see, a green line was drawn around Judea and Samaria. The most important city that was affected by this was, of course, Jerusalem, which is located right here. But there are many other cities that the Jewish people were cut off from. And needless to say, those cities were very, very important for the Jewish heritage, such as Hebron, Bethlehem, Bethel, Shiloh, Shechem, Jericho. Those are just a few that are worth mentioning and that go back thousands of years and connect to the state of Israel. But in this episode, let's focus on Jerusalem. So you see that kind of like a small dent in the line over here? This is the part we're gonna focus on because this is where the Hill of Evil Council is located. So here is a much detailed map of Jerusalem. And again, you can see here this dent that we saw on the other map. And you can also see the East Talpiot right next to the dent. This is the area we were talking about at the beginning of the video where the Hill of Evil Council is located. And you can also see where the old city is located. Now, important to remember is that the green line refers to the year 1949. This is when the agreement was reached and the green line was drawn. And what it basically did, this green line, is divide Jerusalem into West and East. West was controlled by the Jewish people and East was controlled by the Arab nations. And most importantly, the old city, so the Temple Mount, the City of David, the Western Wall, all the important sites connected to the Jewish history were off limits for the Jewish people. That was a very difficult and challenging period for the Jewish people because even in the Ottoman era, the Jewish people had more freedom and more access to the religious sites that are connected with the nation of Israel for thousands of years. But then something incredible has happened. In 1967, the Jewish people regained control of Jerusalem after 1,000 years of exile.
ברגע זה אנו עוברים את שער האריות. אנחנו בתוך העיר העתיקה. תוכל תביא הר הבית ואני נוגע באבני הכותל המערבי.
As you saw, this was a very joyful day for the Jewish people and a day when Jerusalem was reunited. So, before I will move on to the Hill of Evil Council and the United Nations involvement in that area, I would like us to remember the words of the prophet Joel. So let's listen.
For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations, and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people, and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations, and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people.
So, a valley is mentioned here, the valley of Jehoshaphat. There are three important valleys around the historical Jerusalem: the Tyropian Valley, the Hinnom Valley, and the Kidron Valley. Traditionally, the valley of Jehoshaphat that Prophet Joel mentions is the Kidron Valley. And just for orientation, you can also see one of the proposed locations of the Hill of Evil Council. This is this hill over here. Now, what is interesting is that we read in this passage of Joel that God will bring down the nations to the valley and he will judge them there. And why will he judge them? Because they have divided his nation, they have divided his land. So here again is another view on the Kidron Valley where the nations will be judged and a proposed location of the Hill of Evil Council. But there is another hill which we talked about in the beginning of the video, which has a much better view of Jerusalem and is also considered to be the Hill of Evil Council. This hill is this one over here. The reason that, in my opinion, this is a better candidate for the Hill of Evil Council is that the nations are already gathered there. So let's have a look. So here again is the structure on the Hill of Evil Council we talked about at the beginning of the video. So what is this structure? Well, this is the so-called UNTSO, which stands for the United Nations Truth Supervision Organization. But the main building is better known as the Government House, which was constructed by the British. Here is an old photo of the government building, and just for orientation, the Temple Mount would be that way, which is north. When the British mandate ended and the British left Israel, then this building was given to the Red Cross. Speaking of the Red Cross, I'm sorry, but I just have to mention this. So the Red Cross uses right now three symbols. The first one is, of course, the Red Cross. The second one is the Red Crescent. And the third one is like a red crystal or something. The Red Crescent was introduced really by the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire didn't want to use the cross, so they were using the Red Crescent. And eventually the Red Crescent was officially recognized also by the Red Cross. Now, for Israel, it is problematic also to use the cross because the cross is often recognized as a symbol of the Crusades, and the crescent, of course, I don't have to talk about this. This is the long history of conflicts between Jews and Arabs. But the Jews do have a symbol that they are happy to use, which is the Star of David. But guess what? The Red Cross is not feeling comfortable to use the Star of David because it may offend the Muslims. And so it is okay to use the red crescent in Israel, which of course may be offensive to some of the Jewish people, but it's not okay to recognize the Star of David, a Jewish symbol, as officially working with the Red Cross. And so this red crystal or something is introduced to show neutrality. Of course, this is just one of many, many reasons why Israelis don't really like the Red Cross, because it's corrupt. It is one-sided and it is being funded by a lot of Arab money. Anyways, let's continue. So then the Red Cross gave this building to the United Nations. Can you imagine this? I mean, who gave the United Nations the right to have this building? I mean, they didn't buy it. They didn't pay for it. Why did they receive this building for free? That's the question. So we talked about the Hill of Evil Council. Now let's talk about the Hill of Evil Council. So the Council of the League of Nations confirmed the British mandate in 1922. And this territory was actually divided in two. So this is actually the original two-state solution for the British mandate, right? You have the territory that we know today as Israel and an Arab part, which today is Jordan. So, as I mentioned, when Israel announced its independence, it was attacked from all sides. The war ended, as we mentioned, with a ceasefire and, of course, the division of the land, drawing borders with a green pencil. And the area that was most affected was, of course, Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria. Anyway, today this building on the Hill of Evil Council also has an office for a UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process. What I also need to mention here is that the United Nations is one of 4 members of the Middle East Quartet. The other 3 are the Russian Federation, the United States, and the European Union. So we do have quite an interesting representation on this hill. All the nations, the representatives, are on this hill. And in the context of the prophecy in Joel, this is very interesting. Because the United Nations were directly involved in dividing God's land. Before I will let you watch the rest of the video from the Hill of the Evil Council, I would like to ask you to like this video if you like the content, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell button. That really helps me a lot as a creator. Additionally, if you would like to help me more as a creator, you can become a patron of the channel. This really helps me as I create those videos. You know, I make a lot of the content myself. I create the maps, the 3D models. So if you enjoy that and you think it's worthy, then you can support the channel. Of course, if you don't, that's okay too. I understand. No problem. I do this for free, so no problem. Also, make sure to check out my social media. I am showing Telegram here. I'm trying to share some additional stuff there. Some stuff I can only share on certain medias that, for example, YouTube would block. So make sure you check it out. I will leave links to all of those below in the description of this video. So, I wish you all the best. Have a great day. And now, as I promised, enjoy the rest of the video.
We see the origins where Jerusalem started. In front of us, under the dome of the rock, the Temple Mount. Below, we see the city of David and the Kidron Valley. This is where the history of Jerusalem began. This is where we had first the Jebusite city. This is even before that we had Salem that Abraham visited. And later on, King David made this little hill the capital of the 12 tribes of Israel. History did move on, and his son Solomon was the one that built the temple above. He built the temple to honor God, to have a permanent place where God's glory would reside among his people. Today, of course, in this place, we have the ancient walls from Herod's time. We have the Dome of the Rock, which is a Muslim shrine. But in Herod's time, there was a beautiful building of the Second Temple in that location. When Jesus came to Jerusalem, he was coming from the east, behind this mountain you see in front of you, Mount of Olives. He was coming from death to life because he was coming from the desert, and behind this mountain there is the Judean desert where there is no life. And he saw Jerusalem as he was coming from the area of Jericho. He stopped in Bethania, Bethphage, and then he saw this eternal city that God has loved so much. Today, on the Mount of Olives, we have the cemetery, one of the biggest and most ancient cemeteries in the world, where Jewish people for centuries wanted to be buried there, as they believe the words of Zechariah, and one day they will be resurrected when the Messiah will step down on the Mount of Olives. They will be the first ones that will have the privilege to see him, and together with the king and ruler of the world, they will enter the holy city. This is the hope of Israel today. This is the hope of Jerusalem today. If we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, we are praying for that, for the Messiah to come back. Only he offers eternal shalom that will bring hope, that will erase the confusion and save his chosen people, Israel. Today, this is also the hope of many Christians, that believe that Jesus will step down on this mountain and he will enter Jerusalem. In a time of war, in a time of conflicts, Jewish people are looking up. Christians are looking up, awaiting salvation and peace. May this come soon. Shalom.